Welcome to the Zachrilege cast, Cory Johnston. You are a first. I've been on Cory's show, well, one of them, which means you might not like me, but I've actually never chatted with Cory until now. Welcome aboard.
Well, thanks for having me. We spent the last few days chatting via Messenger, so.
Oh, very much so. Yeah, you just have to read. I told Cory, please don't just read your answers on that, when I ask you questions. I've already asked.
Yeah.
I like to prepare people some. We can't really be prepared for the Zachrilege cast unless you have one or two of these, just in case.
Yeah.
So I only have one out of context quote. I don't even know if it's out of context, but here we go. I seem to think that we were having rather profound conversations, and I owed it to the world to inform them of how intelligent we were.
Yeah. I must have been a guest on somebody's show when I said that.
That was Cory talking about the Brainstorm Podcast, which is one of many. So at some point we'll get a Canadian to apologize, but we want to make it natural. So whenever it's time. So how did you decide to get, because I believe that was your intro podcast, because now I think you're up to 4. When did you decide, let me do a podcast?
It was actually shortly after I kind of got my own place after my separation, and I'd gone up to Regina or come up to Regina all the time to hang out with my buddies, and we'd drink and we'd wax philosophical and we'd imagine we were intelligent and having really profound conversations. So then I was like, hey, I might as well record this, put it on the air. And I think Scathing Atheist and Cognitive Dissonance were still relatively new at that time. So I thought, this sounds pretty easy. I'm sure I can do this.
Just during the golden age, did you say was it 2013 when you started, or 2014?
2013.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just before like almost the onslaught of hundreds of podcasts that atheist and skeptic related.
No, it was in that like 2015. We're like the second class, 2015, 2016. I don't know which class we're on now. I'm not very classy, but I do want to share. So this is the shirt I got when I was at the beach last week. So if you can, I don't even know if you'll be able to read the whole thing.
Nice.
Make fear disappear. What's your superpower? So for the people on video, you get to see that. So I have my Backwoods Bastard barrel-aged stout that I've had on probably 10 times on this show. And then I have a beer from Florida, the Bell Cow from J-Dubs. This is a milk chocolate porter, maybe a little more in summer range because it's not as heavy. It's kind of like chocolate syrup with beer. Some would like. I would. Anyway, just wanted to mention that since Cory's being good and drinking his Canadian Crush over there.
Yeah, my Diet Orange Crush. Yeah.
So what would your kind of elevator pitch be for the Brainstorm podcast?
It's a series of shows that covers a current events, science, and religion from a critical, skeptical point of view. It's tough to bill it all together because we've done a conference under the banner of the Brainstorm Podcast, Shift to Reason, and the Brainstorm Podcast itself is turned into like I say, like 4 or 5 different shows with different focuses. So,
but it's one of those shows that goes on for a while. I just remember when I was on, I already had some beer before the show started, but then it was like, I don't know if it might have been a 2-hour recording, but late on Friday night, that's a beer fueled show, at least for me.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, usually the interviews are between an hour and an hour and a half. We used to keep guests for the whole night, but that just seems like too much of an imposition, especially with the time change and time difference with some people.
Yeah, people can't guess from the accent. Where are you located?
Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada.
Which is a real place, people.
Yeah, that's right.
I was like, okay, show me a freaking moose. Let me see where you are.
Yeah, I don't have any moose nearby, but
is it Western Canada? Because Canada's such freaking huge country. No one knows.
Yeah, we consider ourselves Western Canada, but geographically, we're kind of in the middle somewhere. It's because there's teams in Canada. There's West versus the East. So naturally, we have to be in the West because we picked a team.
Yeah, I mean, you can't split America like up evenly East and West because we're so much on the East Coast. So it's probably the same. Because I remember a friend of mine saying, "No, the term Canuck is a Western Canadian, not not the entire country." I was like, "Oh, sorry."
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, exactly.
That's probably why the hockey team is the Vancouver Canucks, and the Canadians are over in the East in Montreal.
And as usual, all things are correct in the world because the NHL finals are about to start and no Canadian team is involved. Almost. You got one close,
Yeah.
That's so sad. I'm sorry. Too soon. Very much too soon.
I'm actually one of the few Canadians who doesn't watch any hockey. So.
Oh, my gosh. Wow.
Yeah.
To be an American, not in the NFL. So you've been doing the show in the 5-year range. How has this kind of podcast community and the atheist community changed in that time? I could probably just drink my beer and let you talk for an hour on that one. Huh?
Yeah, just about. It has been an interesting way, because I was active in the online community for a good 4 or 5 years before I started the show. So then you saw Thunderfoot and Arn Raw at the same events, and you could see the original Reason rally was kind of a big deal back then. And there was all these different people, but everybody kind of had the same idea. And I mean, looking back on it now, it was very white and male centric, obviously, but the things as people started, I don't know, dividing themselves up into different groups or noticing that certain groups weren't being treated as well, then things kind of branched off, and there's a bunch of different little groups now, almost as the whole movement grew, right? Almost like secularism or atheism hit this size where it was too big to be one thing.
Yeah, it's like they say the herding cats analogy plus it doesn't take long. You go, wait, we're talking about something we don't believe in. How can we really connect on that? There has to be something else. Plus, there are 30,000 Christian denominations at least, so I guess we're going to have atheist denominations.
Yeah.
And we haven't gone to war to the point of trying to wipe each other out yet. But with memes, I suppose anything's possible.
Yeah.
When you started, sorry, you go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, and some of the discourse does seem pretty, I don't know, aggressive is I think a fair fair word to say.
Well, on your, I don't know if it's your second show, but you started Hardcore Skeptic Examines. So what was the idea behind getting that show off the ground?
I don't know what triggered my idea, but I was thinking I would do a long form documentary style show with a series of interviews and commentary and kind of tie it all together into this long 3-hour episode. And I could discuss social justice. And at the end, I could come to some kind of conclusion about where I stood and having the best arguments from either side, and really looking at the academic side of it and examining the evidence. And that turned into just a series of interviews released each on their own, because that as a project was so, I don't know, daunting. It was almost too creative, too much work for me to actually accomplish.
So was there an actual set okay, I'm going to do X amount of interviews and then do the big kahuna, put it together at the end?
Yeah,
and what actually became of this?
Yeah, I had planned to do 5 interviews from each side, like pro SJ social justice and anti-social justice. And even the people that I discussed considered anti-social justice don't really consider themselves anti-social justice, just anti-SJW. So then I had 5 and 5, but then as the information started coming in, I started realizing, well, I need to have like an interview with Alex Jules so I can get a person of color kind of perspective. Oh, well, here's this person who has a background in implicit bias. I better get an interview with them. And then I talked to like a political scientist, Phil Klinkner, about the ebb and flow of progress and this kind of the survey statistics. And it just, every time I learned something else, I had to add more interviews on it. And then of course, the more that I get from the pro side with different perspectives and more information, I felt like I had to balance that out with the anti side. So then by the end of it, I ended up with just about 30 interviews all told. And I've still got, I think I've got 15 released. I've got one that I'm in the process of working on. And then I've got another, let's see, that's 16, probably another 10 for sure that I haven't even started working on. And then I still got 2 that I want to actually get, like actually do the interviews, but I don't want to do them until I get closer to done the rest of the stuff.
True. Maybe it's like me thinking, well, I'll find maybe like 10 people interview and then I'll be done because there's not going to be anybody left. And then that's not the problem.
Yeah, that's right. And
then people's no problem.
This is just something you can keep doing forever. Yeah.
But did you have trouble? Like, do you get instantly labeled as pro or con? And does that kind of hinder your ability to get people on the other side?
I think to some extent I did. I mean, I might have been overreaching too, because I reached out to people with large audiences, people that were considered leaders in like the anti-SJW type sphere. And like their audiences are pretty big. Godless Spellchecker has a big audience. Sargon of Akkad has a big audience, but they wouldn't get back to me. And then I think later on I tried getting a hold of like Jeff Holiday and like some other YouTubers who were like considered anti-SJW. And I mean, I don't know for sure. They never said to me that they didn't want to do the interview because I was biased, but I was obviously too small time for some of them.
Yeah. Getting on that YouTube side, I'll see people who are YouTubers and like, they're like, I don't have that many subscribers and they have like 7,000. But then you look at like Shoe on Head, who was almost 1 million. And you're like, what?
Yeah. I don't get it.
Where are all these people? And I don't know. Sometimes I don't know. It's like, are you really on the anti side or is this just the really popular side? And of course, isn't it just easier to be negative about stuff than to like come up with actual arguments? But that's not necessarily what everybody is all the time, but you know, that's what you get from limited time to actually pay attention to everything.
Yeah, that it seems like, I don't know, there's just a different thing going on YouTube where like some people get thousands and thousands of subscribers, where like podcasters work their asses off to get a couple hundred downloads an episode. And it's just like such a different, I don't know, different world. Like, I talked to an anti-feminist, who went by the name Morally Gray. And he had just hit, I think, 10,000 subscribers when I did my interview with him or my debate with him. And he had gone through my episodes and he was like, well, most of your episodes don't even have 100 downloads. Wow. I mean, 80 downloads is pretty good to me. Like, seems like not bad.
I never want to judge somebody in terms of just downloads, but then you do look at numbers, and it's not hard to get a little jealous and excited. So for this show, what's kind of the format? I've listened to a few episodes. Do you usually do like a pre and post for the interview? You do like kind of a capturing it, and what's the difference between your posts for a pro SAW versus anti?
Well, when I first started, I tried to do a pre and a post breakdown. Like I would intro the show and then I would break it down afterwards a little bit, maybe analyze some of the things they said. And but then I got kind of pushed back because people didn't like me arguing against them when they couldn't defend themselves. So then I kind of changed that up a little bit. And it's hard, I guess, to say that, I treated both sides the same, because on one side, sometimes you're dealing with like somebody who's got a PhD and they can provide you with a series of studies that are well researched and considered essentially the consensus opinion within their field. Like the sociologist that I interviewed for, I think it's episode 3 or 4 of the Hardcore Skeptic series, versus like somebody who's on the anti side who gives me like a bunch of clickbait titles or like almost like a bunch of claims that I can check out and find out that that's not the full story. It's almost like talking about ideas versus talking about making claims about a group of people. It was an interest. I tried to be as fair as I could. And sometimes I just left the interviews as they were. Like, I think with Ed Smith, I just was like, okay, this was a good interview. We disagree on a few things. I'm just going to leave it as it is. But then with other interviews, I took a deeper look at some of the things they actually claimed. And I think I was with Atheist Joe. What I did, I changed the format from doing a pre and a post, and then each claim he made, I would break in, make my counter argument, and then I got his counter argument. So I would read off his counter argument and then I would go have a final point on that discrepancy, that point where we disagreed. And that seemed to satisfy some people, but that is a lot of work. And then you got to wait for the person you're talking to like get back to you with the answers to your disagreements. And I don't know. There doesn't seem to be an easy way to do it.
Yeah, it's tough enough for me, like when I'm doing an interview, just to get some questions down to then instantly be able to like counterpoint what something somebody says that you may have never heard before.
Yeah.
Or an argument that's very vague and, well, this one person did this thing, therefore all feminists suck kind of thing. Right. And you're just like, I can't possibly respond to that. But is there like an argument you heard during your interview series that really changed your mind about just one like specific issue?
That's actually a really good question. I think that ultimately most of the interviews ended up reinforcing opinions I kind of already had. Like I was kind of on the fence, but I wasn't really sure. But I kind of leaned towards the pro side. And a lot of that, the interviews really reinforced the pro side of things and kind of made me almost more supportive of a lot of the systemic issues that different groups face. I guess in that sense, I guess a good answer to that question would be my belief in systemic racism and systemic sexism became cemented and I became sure that was a real thing. Okay.
Well, I know I was asked once, like, what was something where it changed my mind? I was like, oh crap, I need to go back to the memory banks, and it was a tough one. So I kind of threw that one out of left field. So I appreciate you want to come up with an answer, and the Diet Orange Crush is the magic elixir.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, this is kind of a question you asked during your show, whether people are pro or con. So do you have a best argument against social justice?
I think the best arguments tend to be look at like skewed, almost what I would say is skewed statistics. Like there's often the argument like, well, I mean, there's more black people being imprisoned and more black people being incarcerated or policed killed by police because they're the ones doing more crime. And there's these statistics that if you just look at them from a surface level, they could convince somebody. But I mean, there's more to it than just those straight numbers, right? So, which is exactly the problem. I think some of the best arguments are the ones that are superficial and will fall apart under scrutiny, but maybe that's just the ones I've heard. So.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe we've killed the social justice thing. Do you think in general, though, talking about social justice, just saying SJW, does that automatically kind of cut down the amount of actual discussion that you end up having? Or maybe that's on the negative side because
it's hard to say.
Because if you're like, I like Black Lives Matter, let's talk about it. You'd be like, okay. But if you're like, I think Black Lives Matter is a terrorist organization, you'd be like, whoa, before you start talking about it.
Yeah, that's right. Like I think if people label you, then they often will come out with they will sometimes hold back and they won't converse with you in the same way. Like I have noticed even numbers, like the download numbers from my regular shows that have very, just tangentially touch on social justice, that those numbers have gone down as my expression of my social justice interests has increased. So.
People had enough. Well, let's talk about something not completely different, but close. You're not like me where I'm just like, I'm just doing one interview show. You're like, no, one interview show. It's like potato chips. Got to have more. So Skeptic Voices, pause for applause. How did you come up with the odd concept of actually getting to know your friendly neighborhood skeptic activist?
I can't remember I can't remember where the idea came from, but I do remember like that I wanted to know more about different people. Actually, it might be because like sometimes you get a glimpse of the way that podcasters interact with each other if they know each other well. And you kind of wonder, well, I wonder what that person's like off the air. And wonder like what their family life is like. What do they think about life and death and money and like what is all this stuff that influences their life? And I think it's actually a really satisfying project compared to some of the other stuff I've done.
What made you decide to kind of separate your skeptic social justice interviews from your, these are actual human beings interviews?
Just mostly a matter of timing, because I had that big plan for the Hardcore Skeptic series, right? Like there was going to be all this one project and focus on one topic. And then I was like, but let's get to know some people too. So like a bit later, I came up with the Skeptic Voices thing, and it was just almost more timing.
Now I'm missing, is there one more that I didn't cover of your shows?
Well, I mean, I guess Positively Skeptical, me and Gumby or Destin kind of started, which was kind of an attempt to examine one topic for like a half hour and try to be fair to the people who believe in that thing. Like we touched on homeopathy and we touched on acupuncture and I think there was one more before we ended up not doing anymore. But the idea was to look at it from a positive perspective and not be belittling or making fun of people.
So acupuncture, how bullshit is it?
Oh, it's bullshit.
Steal from another show.
Yeah. It's interesting to try and put yourself in a position to be fair to something that is so clearly not supported by the evidence, and yet still people believe it. But you don't want to belittle those people. They're wrong. They're not necessarily stupid, or they're not necessarily like doing something wrong intentionally. They believe this thing. They're just wrong.
I wonder if a lot of it is just doing a show. You have to do even the superficial research I do. I still have to listen to a few hours of a show a week or blog posts and stuff. I just find that I'm sure just the average person, do they have time to look into everything in their lives? So maybe one person they trust go, okay, acupuncture is great for me. And they're like, cool, I'll do it. Or many other things that are just considered mainstream. You're like, how did this get to be considered normal?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. Like, people they believe the people around them. So if one person says acupuncture worked for me, then they believe that. And that's just the way it goes. And then that carries on, and they go to their acupuncturist or their chiropractor or whatever. And that's just how these things travel. I mean, sometimes it gets way out of hand, like when people like David Avocado Wolf have almost a cult-like following. But I think it's also still fine to make fun of David Avocado Wolf. Maybe not so much the person who's following him and believing what he's saying. I don't know.
You see these people who are kind of almost cult heroes and go, why can't I be a cult hero and just cash in for just a few months, and then I can, put the money away and hide it because nothing matters anymore, and then, go back to doing what I normally do. Yeah,
I think it's ethics that holds a person back from
we're atheists. We don't have that, right?
Yeah.
That's what I've heard somewhere. I think the National Enquirer. Of course, you've done a ton of shows. Do you have like some favorite interviews or interviews that kind of took you by surprise during your career?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I did an interview with Peter Coffin not that long ago, and the flow of it was so casual and easygoing right off the hop that it was just such a good interview that I actually felt like for a second, like maybe I know what I'm doing here. But of course you don't want to let that feeling get to your head. But so my interview with Peter Coffin is probably one of the top ones.
Yeah, Peter's kind of a big deal. Like, he's actually kind of on the left side, not the classical liberal, whatever that, like Coke classic of whatever, but actually has an audience despite being kind of on the left side, which I didn't think was possible, but it's true.
Yeah, and he's building. He is always growing. Like, he does really good videos. So I mean, maybe that's the real key.
That's true. I need to just do a boot camp with Thomas Westbrook and Holy Kool-Aid, because he does videos, he does animation stuff. It's definitely videos that get the kids in, as they say. But,
yeah, that's right. But short videos, right?
Well,
you can't do an hour and a half video and expect people to watch it, really.
So of your shows, which one is the best for people who might have had a beer or two?
I think that's probably the Skeptic Studio. I mean, and everything's available on the regular Brainstorm Podcast feed, right? Like, we've got the one, if you search Brainstorm Podcast on iTunes, you'll get everything that we do. So if you listen to the Skeptic Studio or the Rec Table or the Shift to Reason Radio, those are the panel shows with the whole crew where we have just a lot of fun, and it's on a Friday night and we record for 3, sometimes 4 hours, and it's just a lot of fun.
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
So what is the best show to listen to get all that sexy Canadian accent with lots of A's and sorries?
Yeah, that would be the spot. There is the Brainstorm Podcast feed. Like, that's where the A's and the sorries come out a lot. Apparently, I've been told that I say A lot more than your average Canadian. I don't know why.
Now that's a study right there. A's per minute.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know if it's just something that it's part of my speaking. Like, I work in the oil field, so swearing is also just part of the way I speak. So sometimes I'll be swearing away in a place that's kind of it's not normal for you to be swearing at, and it doesn't even occur to me. But that's just because the culture that I'm usually spending my time in is a place where people are vulgar and just don't give a shit.
Well, we're post 30 minutes in, and I don't think we've had a swear word yet. So let's do the behind the actors studio. Do you have a favorite swear word? And I will not beat this out because I don't have to.
Well, I think fuck is probably the best word. It's got so much versatility, right?
Well, are there any cultural, because I'll watch like BBC shows, and they tend to say things like wanker and like things that are not said in the US. Do you have does Canada have its own kind of swear lexicon out there that we're not hearing about that we could take advantage of? Any terms that we'd be like, what's that?
I don't know. I think that we're so heavily influenced by our neighbor to the south that we have
sorry about that.
Pretty much a lot of our stuff is your stuff. There's things like in Saskatchewan that the rest of Canada doesn't do, like we call hoodies bunny hugs and stuff like that.
Yeah. You can almost do this as an insult. You bunny hug you.
Yeah.
Just see if someone responds.
We have grid roads. I don't know if other places have grid roads.
Heard that.
It's a bunch of just roads that are set up in a grid pattern throughout the entire province.
Well. So exact. I don't know. It's not even a thinker. It just is what it is.
Yeah, it just is what it is. That's right.
So do you prefer to be on the asking side? Because I definitely do.
I think it's almost easier to roll with it and just ask questions that come to mind. And I don't know, especially if you get to know the person that you're interviewing. If you know them ahead of time, it helps a lot.
That is true. How tough is it for you? And obviously this has been the case for all your shows, to maintain your podcast schedule since you have a life and you have kids and you have this thing called a job, and you actually have to have a job in Canada. That sucks. We'll get back to that.
That's right. Well, I've been pretty lucky. My job is
blessed.
Hashtag blessed. It's a 7 on 7 off shift. So I work 12 hours a day, 7 days, and then I'm off for 7 days. So then I can do a bunch of stuff in my week off, usually. I'm finding that I've been overloading myself and imagining that I have more time than I have, because you still got to take care of the house and spend time with the kids and your partner and things like that. Things are actually, this is maybe as good a place as any to mention that the Brainstorm podcast is not doing any live shows at all from July to and August, because I'm just going to do some quick interviews, throw in some so that we keep maintain a decent schedule. And, but I'm going to spend the summer with my family. So
weird, man.
Yeah. Instead of spending it on the computer doing podcast work.
Well, what is we do talk about the online world, but what is is there a Saskatchewan atheist community? Are there groups you regularly go to other than your kind of brainstorm group?
We do. There's a pretty thriving Center for Inquiry group in Saskatoon. Excuse me. And we have a CFI group here in Regina too. But it's everybody's got lives and it's hard to make schedules match. So often we don't get together or anything, but we all know each other and talk online and stuff like that. So there have been a few hangouts that we've done that have been pretty successful. And then, I mean, in 2016, we ran a conference and we had 120 skeptics in Saskatchewan, all in the same room, which was pretty awesome for us.
Isn't there one like big conference that's in Western Canada? I can't remember what it's called. Like,
yeah, there used to be, I don't know if he still does it, but there used to be the Imagine No Religion.
Yeah, that was the one I think.
And then in the East, there was the non-con. Spencer Lucas put on a secular conference out in the Ontario area.
Okay, I've had a few Canadian guests on, but I haven't asked this question. This is the name of one of my favorite bands, but they are a little bit long in the tooth, so you may not know them. So I'm just going to say the name of the band and let me know if you have any thoughts, if you've actually heard of them. Blue Rodeo.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Still together after all these years.
Yeah, I could see that. Not exactly my style of music generally, but still a good band. Like, they're a solid band. They have produced pretty good music the whole time they've been together, I think.
I mean, it's crazy that like two of the bands that I like the most are They Might Be Giants and Blue Rodeo, and they're both like, they got together, and it's mainly two guys, and they got together in the 80s, and somehow they've stayed together all this time. And I think they've been kind of big in Canada, and they actually were in a couple of movies here in the US, but they never made any. I mean, they come down to Atlanta if they show up, and like maybe 200 people come to see them.
Right.
But I kind of like that it's not that big. But I just was, curious about that. So I hear a rumor in Canada, you have this thing called a far left party. How are politics different up there?
Well, I mean, I think they're different in that we have three main parties. And so that kind of splits the votes in a different way. We have like our conservatives, which is just as it is, like they call themselves the conservatives. And we have the liberals, which is kind of our centrist party. They tend to campaign to the left, but then when they get in office, they often enact like fiscal conservative type ideas. And then we have the New Democratic Party, which is the left party. And I guess we do have a Green Party, which is even farther left, but the NDP is like our left mainstream party.
So New Democratic Party, is that better than New Atheism?
Yeah, in some ways. Yeah, in some ways.
I was thinking like the Liberal Party sounds like our Democratic Party because they talk left, but then they're really in the center, and they might even be right. Probably compared to Canada, as I say. Hope yours just say Canada.
Yeah, compared to your guys' Democratic Party, I think our conservatives are probably pretty close to that. I mean, some of them. I mean, I guess your Democrats are getting more and more left a little bit now. There seems to be a demand for that.
Some are. I mean, I was almost hoping in our last election that we were going to have like Bernie, Hillary, Trump, and then like Cruz, just to represent a wider spectrum. And then people would actually have been excited about voting for president. And most people were dreading it. And then people made a joke of it. And then now we see where we are. Can we compare our current situation with when Canada had Stephen Harper, or is it much, much worse?
Oh, your situation is much, much worse.
Okay. I knew it, but I just wanted to just check.
I mean, Stephen Harper was bad because he was very authoritarian and he was very much like a Christian conservative. But there were things that he wouldn't touch because he knew they were losers, and he cared more about being in power than he did about pandering to like his values, I guess. And so abortion was never on the table. It was never an issue that was ever going to be, illegal. It was never going to be made illegal. I mean, we have access issues in Canada as much as anybody, but even the far right, there's issues that they'll just avoid. Although
not on this side,
that's changing too, because like I say, like we're always influenced by what's going on down there. So our Conservative Party actually is, I mean, they are moving to the right more and more all the time. And if Andrew Scheer, the leader of the party, wasn't the most boring man on earth, I might be worried about him getting elected, but luckily he is.
Now, your avatar you show on hard score. Why did I say hard score? This is not good. I was off a week, people. It takes a while to get back into the interviewing mode. And Hardcore Skeptic Examines has tattoos. Do you have a favorite tattoo? Is there a story behind that?
I've got quite a few tattoos. I don't know if I could say that I have a favorite, but I got my kids' names as armbands. I've got like a black sun on my wrong shoulder. on my shoulder.
Flip it over.
Yeah.
You're in a mirror, dude.
Yeah. And I mean, I've got a crow on my chest. I've got a big wolf on my back. And I've got the Anarchy A and the Atheist A on my back shoulders. And it's kind of like a big web with also a big red skull in the back, center on the back. So, I mean, they're all kind of like, they all sort of mean different things. Like the wolf is actually the book cover from like I don't know if you'd call him a philosopher, but he was a pretty hardcore heavy metal thinker that I really enjoyed back in the early 2000s. So that's where that kind of came from. And then I guess I've got Torm on my right forearm and Bane on my left forearm. And I guess I always kind of said that those are my fantasy, my Forgotten Realms, yin and yang.
Got it. We have to figure out the balance somehow, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But yeah. So I mean, I've got quite a few tattoos, but I don't look like the icon, the avatar.
Okay,
too much of a farmer.
We've gotten toward the end as we're trying to do a slightly shorter interview segment of this show. I said segment, people. Get scared. I said it's permanent vintage. Do you have a joke to share with the audience?
It's not a joke, but it's a funny little anecdote from last night. I moved the television. We've recently rearranged our living room, and my girlfriend said, "Do you think that you could say you're looking at it from a different angle?" And because we were discussing ideas as well and looking at things from different perspectives, so it had I guess a double meaning, and it was just a kind of we laughed because we're kind of corny like that.
I like that though. You gotta bring what's real. Okay, I was thinking now. I make my poor guest, have to do a joke every week. It doesn't seem fair that I don't, so I'm gonna probably tell a bad joke. This isn't a dad joke; it's just a bad joke. So I'll do that, and then we'll see about getting this show off the rails. Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, and Dave Rubin walk into a bar. The bartender says, "Hey, we don't serve your types in here." Peterson says, "Clean your room." Sam Harris says, "You took me out of context." Dave Rubin asks Jordan Peterson about pronouns. I'll be better next week. So how can people find your shows?
The brainstormpodcast.com or brainstormblog.net. Those are the best places.
Well, you made it darn easy.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, I mean, you could follow me on Twitter at Hardcore Skeptic, or you can follow the show at Brainstorm Pod on Twitter. So, yeah.
Do both, because you got to be sure. If you got a Canadian corner, you got to make sure. Did you see the body? Right. Did you? Exactly. Well, thank you, Cory, for being on, and good night and good luck to everybody out there. I'm back, baby. And next Thursday I'll be back again. So more shows to